Hi there, how to Jedi mind trick your creative inner critic to be your greatest creative force, and may the force be with you. We all have this little voice in our head when we're doing stuff saying, oh, it's not very good, or oh, you could do better than that, or so and so does it much better than you do. What are you thinking of? And in this video, I'm going to show you some ways that you can not necessarily silence that little critic voice, but actually use it to your advantage, or tame it to your advantage, so that it actually becomes a superpower rather than let's be honest, a pain in the ass. So why do we have this? Well, I think it's worth thinking about our experience, and even from our very earliest years in school. You know, we're assessed on whether we are top of the class, middle of the class, bottom of the class, by national averages. We're assessed on whether we can spell, whether we can't spell, whether we can control a pen or not. We're put in bands, we're streamed, all of this sort of thing. It continues through to the workplace about whether we are being assessed or being managed, what our performance level is, performance indicators. It happens when we look on social media. We compare ourselves with other people and their wonderful lives and think that we're not good enough. It's all around us, this whole sort of culture of comparison, and of just, or feeling that we're just not good enough. I think it's a massive shame, and I think particularly for a creative, where you need the freedom to play and to experiment and just to create without that. And thinking back to how we were when we were very young children, how we played without those, without sabotaging ourselves, basically, how we played purely for the joy of learning and purely for the joy of play, rather than assessing everything that we do. I don't know when that does start, but that sort of utter childlike play, I think we lose as adults, which is a really big shame. And I think the inner critic has something to do with, sabotaging us every time we put pen to paper. So what can we do about this? Well, mind trick number one, which is a really, really powerful trick that I learnt, actually, I can't take credit for this. A number of years ago, I did some courses with Mike Monday, and I was really heavily into his methods. And I think this is derived from that in some way. I've continued it through my creative pathway for the last 5-6 years or so, and I found it to be really helpful. So what you do is you need to learn to essentially switch your critic off and just create and play. So in my case, I'm a musician, I'm writing music. So if I know that I need to start a track, I will write 3, 4 or 5 little sort of improvised sketches of anything, and I throw it down on the page and I make no judgment on it. Now, this really takes some practice, but I make no judgment on it. I don't have any, try not to have an indicator in my mind of whether I think that sounds good or bad, or whether it fits the brief or it fits what I'm trying to do. I literally just improvise, and just enjoy the process without the pain of the assessment, if that makes sense. And then I don't spend long on them, 5-10 minutes on each one, record them, pop them onto a Trello board, actually, and then the next day I'll listen back to them. Now, while you're doing them, of course, I have in the back of my mind, okay, this sounds okay, or it doesn't, and I'm desperately trying to get rid of that. But I do find the next day that actually going through them, I have a hugely more objective point of view of them, and I can make a much better assessment. And then I will go on and I will develop what I think is the most promising one or two of those sort of germs of an idea. But what I'm trying to do is separate out the creativity from the assessment and the working in detail and the technical stuff. So I'll have a creative session on a track, and then I will, away from the DAW often, I'll just listen to it on Trello, make a recording, listen to it the next day, and have what I call a listening session. And I listen and I sit down critically, using that critical ear then, and I switch off the creative ear, really. I'm trying to just listen to my inner critic, and I write down a list of things that I want to do in my next creative session with that track. So I'm absolutely, totally separating out my creative, playful, childlike mind from the technical, analytical, inner critic mind. And that takes a bit of practice, but it's much easier if you have a creative session and a analytical session at separate times, rather than trying to create a little bit and then criticize it and go back and correct it, create it, criticize it and correct it, for example. So in what I do, writing music, so for example, when I'm actually composing in my DAW here, I don't quantize anything. I just play in, and if it's in time, it's in time, and if it's not, it's not, and it's approximately right. And I'm looking for overall shape. I don't faff around with quantization. I don't faff around with routing in the DAW if I can help it while I'm creating. That's something that goes into a separate session. As I say, if you want to explore this further, Mike Monday's stuff is absolutely brilliant on it. I'll try and remember to put a link in the description below. Second Jedi master trick is to reframe that voice. So often it says, well, in my head, it says, that's not good enough. And a reframe into, well, okay, it's not great at the moment, but it's on a continuum. So I'm improving, and it's on sort of part of a journey. This is the beginning of my journey to getting this better. It stops the voice from being negative and just being rubbish all the time. It's just saying, try and make it say, okay, well, that's all right, but, if that makes sense, or see it as a positive criticism towards, you improving all the time. Third one, and this works really, really well sometimes, totally ignoring your critic completely, because my inner critic will sort of default to stereotypes, generic sort of ideas. Oh, that doesn't sound like anybody else, or that doesn't sound great, or what on earth is that supposed to be? Oh, that's a bit weird. Are you sure? And sometimes you need to just say, I'm going to go F off it. I'm going to do this, whatever. And utterly and completely just shutting it down and just saying, yeah, this is the route we're going. Don't talk to me about this anymore. All three of those, I think you can sort of see, well, I'm separating the mind out. And I suppose if you look into the neurological way that this works, I would imagine it's using different sides of the brain or different parts of the brain. And I think what I'm trying to do is not to try to use those two parts of the brain interchangeably quickly all at the same time. I'm using one side for a session and a period of time, and have a very clear delineation about using the other side. Now, don't get me wrong, that critic is absolutely vital when you come to having your listening session and you switch off the emotion, because I think often, conversely, the emotion of writing the music can influence your inner critic as well, and actually make your inner critic too kind, or get swept away with the emotion and forget, that actually, well, it's all out of time and it's a load of rubbish, harmonically. So separating off your creative, emotional side as well, so that you can really give your inner critic its, full bloom, is really, really helpful. However, coming on to my fourth mind trick, you need to give the inner critic its stage and its space and its time, and then you need to switch it off, which is why I've said this in videos before, which is why I work with a timer on. So I'll do, I don't know, say 30 minutes, 50 minutes or so. I tend to work in 50 minutes blocks of listening and being critical and listening to that inner critic voice. And then I will switch it off. I'll write down what it says so that it's boundaried, and I have a list of things that need doing for the next time. And then I will switch that inner critic sound off if I can do, and go back to being creative. And this, I find, is an immensely powerful, this sort of two-sided approach is immensely powerful, because I think you're in control of what's going on. You're stepping back. There's a meditation and mindfulness teaches us that actually we can't necessarily trust our thoughts, because our thoughts are in many ways clouded by our experience, by our emotions, particularly in the context within which they occur. And sometimes it can be really helpful and useful just to step back from those thoughts and imagine yourself as a different entity from your thoughts, so that you can assess whether they are valid or not, and whether they are deserving of your time and attention. And separating yourself from your thoughts and your emotions, so that you are not your thoughts and your emotions. You are a separate thing, and your thoughts and your emotions are a separate entity that you have control over and some sense of objectivity to, was a massive help for me, and is, I think, probably fairly sort of core to what I'm trying to explain here. If you're still with me, good job, because I'm going to go through, tell you something that I found really helpful, but it's a bit wacky in a way, I suppose. This I found genuinely helpful, even though it sounds a bit bizarre. And that is, well, you've probably heard about sitting down with your future self and thinking about what you would like your future self to do, what they would say to you, looking back on your life, say from 5 years in the future, which is actually quite a helpful exercise in, envisaging where you're going and what you're going to do. I'm going to suggest that you sit down with your inner critic, sit down and have a cup of tea or a beer with your inner critic, and you give your inner critic a name. Mine's called Ken for some reason. I don't know why. Why? Don't have any other Kens or Kenneths in my life, or any association with a Ken. I don't have any childhood trauma to do with a Ken. Anyway, so you are genuinely getting to know your critic and think back, okay, why are you, Ken? Why are you like you are? Why are you so negative to me in this way? What happened? Was it at school you were told that you were rubbish at art? I was, sort of, not directly, but I got a pretty clear idea from my art teacher. Were you told in a report that you would never make much of mathematics? That I have a vague recollection of that. Don't think that's particularly traumatic for me now, but has it had an influence on you? Why is your inner critic like they are? What has happened in your life? And I'm not suggesting you dig up any deep traumas here, but what's happened in your life that has made your inner critic think the way they do and have the hang-ups that your inner critic does? Also, conversely, what's happened in your life that has made your inner critic, and this is vital, made your inner critic accurate and helpful? Is it that you've listened to hours and hours of, orchestral classical music, so your inner critic really knows what an orchestra should sound like in terms of mix and orchestration and is worth listening to? Or is it that or conversely, is your inner critic just overly negative of stuff that you do because of something that, sort of triggered it earlier in your life? There's a myriad and 1,001 things to sort of think about there. I would really genuinely try and just take half an hour, sit on your own, where you're not going to be interrupted. For me, I quite like writing stuff down and journaling, because it sort of gets it out onto the page and it's not sort of continually going around in my mind. I won't do it for hours, but just see if you can have a conversation with your critic and find out, okay, Ken, why are you such a bastard? Or, okay, I know you're an expert in this area, Ken. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And actually, having that sort of two-way conversation with yourself. You're still here. I'm amazed. Thank you. I really, really hope that's useful. I think probably the overall overriding thing in this video, or for me, is that creativity, the true creativity, you have to create like a child, I think, in a way, without fear, without judgment, and just get absorbed in that beautiful process of creation without criticizing yourself. Of course, being a critic comes later on and is helpful, and we all have to do it. But I think the key is not to fear it, to learn to understand it, to separate it out, control it, listen to the things that you know that it knows and it's good at, and also take the other bits with a pinch of salt, and occasionally just tell it to just F off, really, because it's completely wrong and just being totally negative and being down on you. Thank you. I hope that's useful. I'll put another link or so to something up here that might be of interest. If you haven't subscribed, then please do. I would love to see you. If you want to if you'd like to comment and say hello, that would be fantastic. Any thoughts on your inner critic and how you cope with it would be wonderful to hear. Thanks ever so much. See you again soon. Bye-bye.